So even if you just talk about like that, it can also be broken down by heat, by sunlight, by friction.
And that converts over to CBN.
Sure. So you know, there is a half-life process where these cannabinoids and such do, you know, change over time. So there's that aspect to it alone.
And then there's the terpenes.
But absolutely.
They volatilize
and
too.
How quickly do they volatilize, you know, especially the ones that come off first with very low temperatures, night temperatures. So the reality is you've got it as good as it's ever going to be. How do we preserve that, right? So part of that process is obviously...
We're Jug Dealers, we're the podcast you need in your feed. Teaching the game like you never seen. Jared, Gabe, Rambo, from OGs. Masters of the globe, set your mind free. From Denver, Colorado, where the dead is green. We set the data points for the SOPs. Jug Dealers Podcast, yes indeed.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Jug Dealers Podcast, where we discuss all things cannabis and lifestyle related, brought to you by the good people at 5-8. And we are available at jugdealers.shop and jugdealers.net.
Yes.
We are back. It is the new year.
It is a new year. Good to be back. Good to be back in
here.
studio. Of course, everything's still available there on the website. You can request samples. I will say this, just kind of a heads up to people that, you know, we will be going into a little more focus aspect in our samples here in the coming year. You know, I think probably doing maybe even something like a monthly thing. You're also going to see a Jug Club membership open up at some time this year, Mr. Grambo, right?
That's going to be sweet.
We've been working with that in the background, and so people have exclusive opportunities to new products that are dropping, our newsletter, exclusive discounts,
tutorials. We'll be going into the garden, all that stuff that, you know, the community guidelines.
I was going to say, now that the regulations have seemed to loosen up a little bit,
but even so, the dirty stuff's going to happen behind the curtain, folks. But you'll see a lot more. You'll see a lot more actual, you know, plant stuff, garden picks, you know, being able to be a little bit more open with it. It is great to be back. I'm excited about this episode. It is a drying, curing.
There's a lot of gardens I go in and I see really nice flower. And then something happens. And today what we're discussing is hopefully how to prevent the something happening.
How do we keep that wonderful flower? How do we grow the best flowers in the world? And then how do we
not ruin
keep those flowers, right? So really just very quickly, you know, kind of what's going to be gone over in this episode is going to be a bit about the process, right? So it's going to be a bit about prepping your space, you know, the actual harvesting process, you know, hanging the buds themselves, and then monitoring drying and final harvest and packaging. So, you know, curing the buds, water activity versus moisture level. Those
are important. I think that's something that a lot of people miss. Most people at home don't have to worry about it. But if you're in a commercial space and you're trying to keep down the mold, mildew, any of those things where you have a 10,000 CFU, for those of you who don't know, that's colony forming units. But basically anything where you're being tested and being measured for mold, mildew pathogens, water activity versus moisture level, extremely important.
Even if you're not being tested, you don't want that stuff.
You don't want that stuff anyway, right?
Home grow. So this is across the board.
And we will talk just about those key differences and then why all this stuff is important and all that stuff. And really, this is a topic that hit homes for me. And to be fair, we're going to really work on hitting it from both directions, right? I dry in a small 3x3 drying tent with no controls, all the way up to we're going to talk about going full control commercial style.
Spaces,
yeah. So before all that, I did want to do a little bit of a shout out, and I know you got a couple things as well. First off, I'd like to shout out, so Red Tail Hawk, I know you sent me a request for samples out there. I sent you an email back. I think you've tried to get a hold of us a couple times, but your email is full.
I didn't know it was possible to fill email.
Yeah, I actually.
Hey, look, I you know, here's what's weird. I've never deleted an email at Gmail, and mine's not full. But anyhow, I've tried twice, and both times I've got something back saying email. So Red Tail Hawk, it's the email or some other numbers behind it. Anyway, wanted to say that out. I also wanted to do a little shout out to our boy DeVille, Golden Goose Reserve there in South Africa. I see you out there. I see you commenting on our pages, and I will be seeing you in Spain, friend.
We'll both be seeing you.
We'll both be seeing you in Spain.
Or all three of us be seeing.
Oh, did we just drop that? What?
Jug Dealers out and about 2025. Wow. In fact, you know what? Let's actually speak about that. We have a bookings page now. Hey. So jugdealers.net / right?
For
bookings. Either we talked about this.
Me and Jaron learned that the / and / same thing.
Doesn't matter.
I mean, while you're doing the shout outs, you should let everybody know you're going to be down in Tampa with Jair for Urbans.
Yep, I will be. February 1st, Urban Roots, I'll be down there. And then you and I are also going to do an East Coast trip running from Maryland all the way up to Boston. In fact, all the way up to Vermont. Anywhere on the road, hit us up.
Yeah, it looks like we might be doing some meet and greets in New Jersey and Vermont. And not for nothing, if you have something in the Northeast that you want us to come take a look at between February 3rd and 7th, we'd love to come see what you got.
So Jug Dealers out and about. If you guys do want to request us, again, you can go to our bookings page. We will be putting up our travel plans on there so you can see where we're at. And then, if you do have a request for us, hey, come have the Jug Dealers swing on through.
Hell yeah. Let's do a couple shout outs.
That's what I was going to say. Go ahead,
Gabe. These are some listener shout outs. We do go through the comments. Josh goes through the comments. We like to see what you guys have to say, positive and negative. We take it all in. But these are some shout outs to some of our listeners. So we have Crispy Grows.
Crispy.
We have Dennis Richards, 2604. And we have Tilly Gang Growing Co.
I'm wondering if that's a misspelling.
There's a lot of
Tilling Growing Co.
Yeah, Tilling Growing Co. So either way, I may have just butchered your shit. I apologize.
Hey,
but either way, we do see you guys. We
Thank
appreciate
you very much,
guys chiming in. We appreciate the positivity and everything you guys have to say.
Yeah, since we've been gone, we crossed 10,000. Thank you guys so much. That's huge. The Jug Dealers are. Me and Jaron joked, you're not legit till 10,000, and now there's Juggernauts are 10,000 deep.
Here we go. We're rolling in the deep, folks. We're rolling in the deep. So speaking of that, let's go ahead and get into this, and let's get sticky. Let's get icky. Let's talk about harvesting and curing. Right. Let's do this.
It is such an important process. I think, for me, it's evolved over the years so much because when I first started doing it back in the late 90s, you would always wet trim.
Sure.
And you would, a lot of times we'd end up throwing away our trim, but we would wet trim and hang it because you were trying to get it all down. And you didn't, and realistically, you didn't,
dude, bro. So it's going to drip all the way into the end of the buds, bro.
Right. And then I wouldn't, the big thing too was you just really didn't have a lot of people you trusted to come over.
Well, that's the other thing. So you had to do everything yourself. And let me also be clear. I don't, really the true reality, regardless of what quality you get to by the time you harvest, at that point, that's as good as it's ever going to be, ever. So you have two things. Obviously, THC itself has a half-life. So even if you just talk about like that, it can also be broken down by heat, by sunlight, by friction,
and that converts over to CBN.
Sure. So there is a half-life process where these cannabinoids and such do change over time. So there's that aspect to it alone.
And then there's the terpenes.
But absolutely,
they volatilize too.
And how quickly do they volatilize? Especially the ones that come off first with very low temperatures, night temperatures. So the reality is, you've got it as good as it's ever going to be. How do we preserve that, right? So part of that process is obviously the drying and curing of cannabis are essential steps to ensure the potency, and I would even say, and I take that a step further, and essential steps in retaining the potency.
And the quality.
Because the potency's there. It's never going to get more potent necessarily. Well, it's not. I mean, the terpenes can change and whatnot, but as far as like getting more potent, wherever you're taking on, that's max potency. Josh, can you move that up a little bit? Okay. So drying cannabis, you wanted to really make, and I was glad that you made a big point about this, prepping your space. Step one. Okay. So and we'll kind of continue to, I think, keep this mantra going where you'll kind of, Gabe will commit a little or comment a little bit more from a commercial standpoint, and I'll comment a little bit more from a home growing standpoint. So for me, prepping my space quite literally would be setting up my 3-foot, 3x3 drying tent every time to then stack it full. And in reality is I'm here in Colorado, right? So I would get in there, I'd open it up. I'd want to go and just H2O2, get a little bit of a scrub down in the side if possible, right? I'm not saying I'm always perfect, but in a perfect world, right? We're always shooting for ideal. So prepping your space, making sure that you've got a cool, dark space. You want it well ventilated, but you don't necessarily want a bunch of air movement through there. The particular tent I would use, the bottom third around the whole thing was basically a mesh that air could move through. Now, being in Colorado, I also always, I zipped that thing up and left it completely corked up for 3 to 5 days. And I wanted it to open up for it to feel like and smell like Florida in there. You know what I mean? But again,
well, we're in the one thing,
and we'll get there in a little bit.
I was going to say, it'll be different for different people's environments. Colorado is definitely very unique in the fact that we just have such a dry climate. In a lot of places, especially back east, you're going to have a lot more humidity, a lot more moisture. So you will treat it a little bit different.
Oh, 100%. If I went to Florida or I went to Michigan or I went to California or Oregon, I'd have to adjust.
Dehumidifier.
Yeah, I'd have to adjust.
But in Colorado, the way, just so people understand, the way for us to extend that cure time is to just kind of, I'll be honest with you. It's really funny. I have a closet that I'll cure in, and sometimes I'll actually keep a humidifier going right outside, not in, but right outside. And I'll keep the door just cracked just a little bit, just because I don't want it to dry out too fast. The ideal time for me is really that 14 days. We'll get into that in a little bit.
This is more Colorado, and we will get into that. But obviously, we've all heard of the 60-60 rule, right? 60 degrees, 60% humidity. For people that are in a commercial environments, can actually super dial that in. You see that. You do even see people adjusting off of that a little bit, but I think that's a nice kind of rule of thumb. Me personally, mine was in a basement. So, and I also think floating a little bit in that 60 to 70, and then also 50 to 60%. Those are kind of the ideal ranges, in my opinion.
And just a pro tip, in general, I really like to, obviously you're backing off the watering at the end, but you really want to try not to water them before you harvest. And realistically, I try to have as much of that de-leafing done as possible.
And see, what's kind of funny though, I'll be honest, again, in Colorado, sometimes I would intentionally water beforehand to slow that drying process a bit down. Here, if I was in Michigan or Florida, I don't think I'd water for the last 2 or 3 days before I chop those babies down, Again, everywhere is going to be a little bit different, and we'll have a little more fun talking about that. But yeah, in a commercial space, obviously, Gabe,
in a commercial space, I like to do those spaces with some type of, obviously you're going to have epoxy floors. You're going to have some type of
racking, hanging
PVC
system.
Wall. It really depends. Honestly, one of the best systems I've seen is at Phenotype Farmers, where they actually harvest directly to the rack, and then they wheel the racks in the room. So there's so in a lot of systems I've seen, you go from a Z rack on hangers, let's say, even if they're hanging whole plants, and then they'll go into a cure room where another guy is taking it off and putting it on. I've seen anywhere from gas pipe that's put together every, let's say, 2 feet to people will use fencing.
I was going to say old hog fencing.
Yeah, there's so many different, there's a company that does a dry cleaner setup that I've seen that's pretty interesting. The reality is I think the keys to it are ensuring that whatever you harvest makes it in the room in 1 day and fills that room.
I do think,
that's a really important
aspect. I like how you make that point.
Because you don't want to be introducing new product into that room in a second day, because that's going to lead to hay smells. It's going to lead to all that. I've had it happen where... Yeah. So it's tough because you got to have the manpower to do it.
To do that.
And that's why I kind of recommend you get all the de-leafing done beforehand, and if it takes up 2 separate rooms, then design your building so that it has 2 separate cure rooms. The reality is these things are going to live in this room for about 14 days.
I always liked it when I could definitely get my drying tin as full as I could, because if I could only put 2 plants in there, I'd really have to monitor that a lot heavier, because it wasn't sweating out near as much water. So it didn't get that Florida feel. I want that. And I know especially here in Colorado, but you know what I'm talking about. You open your closet and it's oof, and you're okay, it's sweating. It's moving that moisture through, you're taking that moisture that's from the inside, of the buds and moving it towards the outside.
I was going to say, you want it cool. You want it dark. You want it dehumidifiers. I usually have 2 for redundancy. You're going to want to clean those after every round, because they will just kind of, there will be a slime. Usually it goes to a floor sink. You're going to want to clean that floor sink. I'll drop chlorine dioxide bombs in there before any product goes in there. I'll open that room up. I'll let it sit for anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. And then I'll actually open that room up and let it sit.
And again, for me, from a home grower's perspective, no dehumidifiers. I just threw it in there. I really didn't. At home, it was in a basement, so it was going to be nicely cool.
East Coast may be a little different.
It's definitely going to be different. I'm saying, for where I'm
us,
at, it was definitely something where
I didn't use one.
I didn't overly control it, but I didn't have to. I was able to just by see and feel and whatever, I was able to control it a little bit.
I have
more.
A question about that, Gabe, because going from a commercial space, what you're saying is those giants. But what I would do as just a solar home grower, I'd have a 6 or an 8 lighter, whatever. And I would never be able to get all my plants in one chop. So I would do half my room in one, half my room, and I'd put them all on the same rack. You suppose that that wasn't the most ideal way to have done that?
Not particularly. You really want to try and segregate those things if you can, like maybe set up a tent and dry half of it in the tent and half of it.
Because like Jaron said, you have like a special 3x3 just that you dry in specific. So maybe a couple tents. And this isn't like, you don't need your fancy AC Infinity tent for drying, right?
No,
here's the thing.
Yeah,
two holes in it. It's a drying tent.
At home, you can, there's a little more leeway.
Oh yeah.
More what I'm discussing on that is like, you definitely don't want that to be a commercial
and
practice.
That's why I want to, but that's also why I want to mention both sides.
I'm not going to say like, bro, I'm not going to say I can get all my plants down in one day. Like sometimes I introduce, what I mean?
I can't.
Most of mine goes to hash anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
But obviously any commercial situation I've ever been in that's your kind of classic drying with much Rex, there is so much water in there. You have to be dehumidifying. You have to be controlling it. And typically you're going to end up in a situation more like a 14-day dry, where I'm looking at usually more of a 7 to 10-day dry.
One thing I do want to address, and I just want to bring it up. I don't know enough about it that I can really speak to it in an educated manner, but I really want to bring it up because it is becoming more popular. But that is the mechanical reheat that you're seeing in some of these grows. So basically what they're doing is they're taking the ducting. So understand, when you're running your HVAC, that's doing a lot of your dehumidification, as long as you're not running like a mini split. If you're running a mini split in a home unit,
ACs themselves dehumidify.
But if you're running a normal HVAC unit, it's probably going to do about 60% of your dehumidification. Now there's a group going around lately that are talking a lot about mechanical reheat, in which basically what they do is they run the ducting around the room and they drill all these really small holes in it, and through these units. And the way really what they're doing is taking units that exist and just kind of redoing the ducting. So that it just, instead of moving the air around, because what happens is when you have an HVAC system, you have registers. And the air comes out of the register, but it comes out in certain points of the room, in which then there needs to be stratification for it to get around.
There's going to be microclimates
in which people use fans to get this stuff around the room. Now, obviously, if you're in a dry cure room, you don't want these fans going and blowing on the weed, because it's gonna dry it faster on the outside than the inside. In which this mechanical reheat system basically disperses the air evenly around the whole room. Everybody I've talked to has had very good success with it. There's a guy named Steve. I can't remember what his name is.
I mean, it makes sense.
I've seen him beefing with some folks, and I just wanted to address it because the reality is I don't know enough about it to speak about it educatedly. But truth of the matter is, I see a lot of people using it efficiently.
And what I would say is it is
another option when it comes to
and what I would say is I'd advocate for some level of light air circulation, regardless of how you do that. There's no doubt about that.
Look, the plants, especially when you stick, 50,000, 100,000, some of the last harvest they had at Grassroots of the GMO was like 1 million wet grams.
It's a lot of grams.
When you're hanging 500,000 grams in a room, the systems can only do so much.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and you only have so much space. You only have so much manpower. Yep. There's a lot to say. For me, it was like, harvesting is dictated more by when stuff finished. And since I'm always running a varied garden, that's going to obviously dictate, these two are ready. Okay, I'm going to let those go another couple of days. Whereas if you're commercial, it's like, let's stay 60 or whatever. Yeah. The whole trim crew's coming in. It's time to go.
I mean, the big thing for us was too, I scheduled things 6-8 months in advance. So I could tell you exactly what days.
That's what I'm saying.
Harvest. Yeah, it's a 2-day harvest, including the flip, in which all of a sudden these rooms are not occupied for 14 days. Right. But that being said, everything's got to be binned out of that room in 14 days for it to be ready for the next harvest.
Well, okay. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about really, and we talked a little bit about and started even talking about curing and stuff, but really that's all relative to making sure your space is prepared. That's why we kind of talked about stuff. We'll circle back on that, but let's actually talk about harvesting. Yeah. That's kind of a big part of the deal, right?
So like I said, I like to start with, regardless of whether I'm at home or whatever. And the one thing you do want to look at is, what am I harvesting this for? Am I harvesting it for flower? Am I harvesting it for live resin or rosin?
Great point.
But truth of the matter is, I like, in most of the commercial facilities I've worked at, we usually do a day 42 defan, pretty heavy, so that way 3 days before harvest, you're going to have your, defoliation crew come in. They're going to pull as much of that big leaf as possible. So that way, when the harvest crew comes in, it's blow and go.
Now, for me, I can never get back to the corner. So, for like in reality, seriously, this is what it is, bro.
That's
you know what I mean? Sorry. I would do a heavy day 20, and that would be a skirt up and then a heavy D leaf. By the time it got, day 40, which I know a lot of people commercially do.
Those plants are all just holding each other up.
Dude, it was like there's so much goo in there. And I know even Cap talks about doing I think he does a day 20, day 40. You see that pretty commonly. And again, that is a bit of a setup for harvesting as well. You know what I mean? So for me, I tried to go so heavy on the 20 that I only had to do it one time. But again, commercial, home. We're kind of trying to
with under canopy lighting, it's definitely changing the game as far as how much people are actually defoliating.
Yeah. So obviously most people are going to cut, this is pretty practical, but you're going to cut the whole branch, or you're going to cut branches, or you're going to cut the whole plant.
I like whole plant. And that from a commercial aspect, I would advocate for that. For me, because I also wasn't doing that de-leafing, they were coming off pretty leafy still. So I needed to go and do a heavy cleanup on the fans. One reason I like whole plant, especially here in Colorado as well,
holds moisture.
Slows that drying process down.
I always tried to get them as big a branch as I could, but because I had to get all the fan leaves off, I needed it and it just, dude, it gets your arm gets tired. Freaking holding up these big old branches, these greasy ass buds. So like I would take it down. I'd take it down. And again, I'm gonna say something that's a little bit controversial here. Okay. Because
it's not the first time, buddy.
It's true. And won't be the last, folks. But this honestly, my favorite meme of all time. I'll tie that in. So Coma had a meme one time that said, do you have any history of mental illness in your family? He goes, no, but my cousins still are still wet trims.
I came out of the closet on Dude Grows because you're like, I actually wet trim. I was like, oh, you do?
You do?
I wet trim too.
I'll say it today. I'm a wet trimmer, guys. But keep in mind, it's for necessity of the process and moving things through. And it's like when I got to that point, I needed to kind of get it all the way basically done. So I would do me personally, I took it branch by branch down, did a very careful wet trim, and then hang. But yeah.
I was going to say one of the things I like about it is those leaves will actually curl kind of around the bud. And even more so, slow down that.
And my buddy used to call those roll cages, and I always thought,
I've heard that too.
Roll cages, right? And he used to stack up in Tupperwares, right? He'd get big old branches and take just fans off, but leave all spiders on there to cup around like that. And he called them his roll cages, and he would just trim to.
And then you can pull them off. And
trim to order.
The nice thing is you can trim those right at the base, so you're not getting the crow's feet.
Well, and honestly, when you do a wet trim, you don't even really need to use the scissors anymore. You almost just kind of go knock, 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 knock. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd always get annoyed at the trimmers that would just cut around the leaf. It's like, dude, get it at the stem, and the whole leaf just falls off, man.
Yeah,
it's the petioles. So.
But I always like, and I'm pretty, specific about getting the whole petiole off, really trying to get as much of that leaf and stem tissue out of there. Well, not only that, I think it leads to harsher smoke. I think ultimately your smoking stops.
I'm picking that off. I always would just curse all the guys I'd trim with. It's like, dude, not only are you fucking making the bud worse, it's a little bit easier. Just nick it at the petiole.
So again, branch by branch, I would take stuff down. I was always a double trelliser. So that's the other thing. Taking two down, taking the whole thing, that makes the hardest thing.
Unless I'm in a commercial setting, I really like the stakes just because I like to be able to turn my plants.
I get it.
That Gorilla Glue is a perfect example.
I get it. And trust me, when the double trellis gets set, you're locked in. It is what it
you're
is,
locked
bro.
in. There's no.
And that's the other reason why I pretty much had to take it branch by branch. But I'd take it branch by branch out of there. I'd remove everything. I did a full trim on it. And then from there, it would actually go into buckets with gamma lids. But anyhow, we'll get there.
I was going to say in the commercial setting, what we would actually do was if we had a row, a bench is pretty much all the same plants. So what we were actually in 5-gallon pots. And what I would do is cut the trellis out around, and then I would just hang the plant over the side of the table.
Totally.
And then the next crew would come in. They just come in with the loppers, grab it, cut it from the bottom, pick it up, walk out like this to the Z-Racks. I mean, I'll never forget the first harvest we had at Grassroots. It took us 2 weeks to get it down. There was a bunch of kids who had never done anything.
Had to up that efficiency a little bit.
They had never done anything in weed ever. Not to mention the room was unbelievably packed and we're pheno hunting and all the rest of it.
They had a lot working against you.
They, my trim manager had it down to 2 days. getting them turned around. And these are like 3,000 square foot flower rooms.
Right.
So 100 lights.
Right.
That. So
I mean, it's obviously I think it's pretty, everybody probably knows where we're going from here. You cut the you cut the branches, you cut the plants. Now you got to hang them. As we discussed, I mean, there's probably more variability in the way that people hang and dry.
So many different ways. It's hard. Cool. It's hard. I can't knock anybody's system. If it works, it works. The biggest thing, again, like I said, is having that room full. Yeah. Having good airflow, not fans blowing on them, having just good circulation, dehumidification,
but also funny,
sterilization.
You like hangers still, and guess what? It's not just you.
Yeah,
I still see a lot of hangers that are used out there just because people like it where you can hang on the one point, and then you've got a little bit of
there's that one company that has the bars.
Yep.
And you hang it from the bars, and then their thing is once it's ready, you just slide it off the bars into the bins.
That's pretty cool.
I like to use the black. Originally we used Cambros. Why? Because they're food safe.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big things I've been into nowadays,
all BPA free.
I mean, look, dude, those things are like, I don't even want to say how expensive they are, but like you can go get a bin at Home Depot for like $20. And what most people are doing nowadays is buying the liners.
Yeah.
And putting them in the liners, but it's nice to be able to slide it off on the branch right in there. So I like that system. I can't remember the name of that system.
I don't mind it.
That's pretty cool.
So obviously you want to have some space between branches when you get them all hung up. If they're all up on top of each other, clearly there can be some possibility for mold. And that's more from just extended moisture period, right? It's if you're extending any of that time for that moisture to get to the leaf level and sit around there for any longer than it should be, that's where you can have some problems with that stuff. I mean, we'll
go deeper on that.
Even powdery mildew for example, like if you're out on a farm and you want to go spraying, you don't go super early in the morning before the dew's burned off, because then you're going to keep it wet for longer. And it really comes down to, and don't quote me on these times, but it's something very specific. Like this needs 4 hours for the spore to hit and do its thing and whatever for it to take. Right. So if you stay under that, if you're always keeping it, and that's why you'll even see fans used in agriculture and whatnot too. So literally just to break those,
on the East Coast,
that moisture timing.
On the East Coast, they used to have these massive,
but those but those are actually for turning inversion layers. So those are actually to heat it, because, and it doesn't take but just a couple degrees, and to be able to go from a lost crop to like just taking that temperature. And you'll see it in
apple orchards,
Palisades, Palisade. You'll see peach orchards a lot and stuff as well. And it's kind of like, that's a weird looking. It's just kind of a two blade fan, and that's air movement and
we're talking Palisade, Colorado.
Yes. Oh shoot, yeah. Sorry. Shout out to Palisades, California.
Shout out, Cali. We feel you.
Yeah, we feel you. We see you. We feel you.
It's places Palisade, both of us have been.
Yeah,
so.
Palisade, Colorado. So anyhow, obviously you got to get them up. You got to get them hunt. And now it's about monitoring that drying time. And for most people, it's literally it's slowing it down as much as possible. For me in Colorado, that was always the game. If it's my people down in Florida, you're having dehus running the whole time. It's 14 days, dude, minimum.
When we went to P-Bud's place, man, they had to get it down dry and right. Unbelievable.
For me, I'm no dehumidification, stacking it in a tent and trying to hold that moisture as long as I can. This is Colorado. This is Arizona. This is Nevada. This is dry climates, right?
Australia.
I see you there, Australia.
We see you, Australia.
We see you. But typically, on average, you're looking at 7 to 14 days. And that's with or without dehumidification, depending on your environment.
Yep. And you do want to keep it, again, keep it cool. Same thing in the commercial spaces. One of the things, I actually have a friend who he'll turn the lights off day before, put the temperatures in his flower room down in the low 60s. And then he goes to extreme of actually keeping the temperature in his hallways down in the low 60s.
Which is super next level.
Yeah, I mean, he is next level.
I'll
Shout out to Phenotype Farmer.
I think that, for a lot of people, that may be more than you need to do.
But like, it's cool
overkill.
Again, the other thing I would say is I would prefer a shorter dry cure room. You see some of these dry cure rooms that are 15 feet tall, and you got guys.
You want less cubic footage.
Yeah, it's not even just the less cubic footage. I think again, same thing. There's microclimates up high.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's tough to just get that stratification. So realistically, I like a room that's maybe a foot and a half taller than the racks.
Okay. And again, fill in the room, all that kind of stuff, right? Yep. Obviously, you're wanting to check your buds regularly, and even a part of it is just going in there and feeling them a little bit. You'll feel when they start start to dry out. They go so soft. Like that's what always blew me away when I first started growing cannabis. It was like, you got this meaty bud and you go to dry it and all of a sudden it goes so soft. You could just push it like a pancake. You're, oh my God, what happened? What happened? And then you have a little patience and it comes back and it hardens up again. And then you can really start feeling. Now that means that the moisture is starting to move out of the buds, but I like how you put in here small stems rather snap, right?
Yeah.
I don't like big stem snapping. Especially in Colorado, I feel like you've gone too far. So I will I'll feel the buds. I'll give them a little bit. You'll start, you know what? And I'll be honest, use your nose, folks. The nose knows.
Yeah.
When you open that drying room or you open that drying tent or you open that bin or whatever you're doing it in,
wafting.
You go, okay, here we go. Right. And so then I would take that there and I like to take them off and either put them into a jar, take them off of the stem. Right. And then either put into a jar, put it into a drying tube, put it into, a bucket with gamma lids, BPA free bucket with gamma lids. That's kind of usually
my cure manager would always look for that. She would always look for that snap. When she would pull the bud off, she would see how it snapped, and you don't want to get any of that string.
So what I like, exactly. So what I like to do is I'll just take a bud and just push it over.
Yeah.
And if it kind of sits there and goes, but if it goes like this and goes and it snaps off, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it doesn't string down the stem as well. Girl, you know what you were talking about.
Oh, she's the best. She's the best.
Man, that's kind of where, I always opted for going a little bit earlier in Colorado, whereas other places you're literally going to want to go a little bit later. But this is all situational. Welcome to growing plants. It's not a science. It is an art, folks. There is science to it, but it's also, a lot of art.
So I like to, for me, I like to once I've taken it down from the branches, I'll actually take those branches and put them in airtight containers. Again, sometimes lined with the plastic.
Depends. Again, there's a lot of options, and then commercially, I've seen the drying tubes and things like that as well.
The cure tubes.
Yep.
They actually monitor the humidity in there.
Yep. And I know a lot of people have, a lot of different. I don't want to get stuck up on this, but people do that a lot of different ways.
I know Tiny would actually take a lumber moisture meter.
Mm-hmm.
And she would actually kind of plug it into the side of the bud and make sure that it was down at least below 11%.
And I think that's great commercially. Again, I never use any instrumentation, but again, this is home. That's commercial.
You're squeezing, you're smelling.
This is a cure tube here.
That's cure tube.
Yeah.
There.
And how do those work? I'm interested because they make small ones for home growers too.
Screw. Yeah, basically it's just got a screw top that lays horizontal like that. You stack it with buds, and then you can monitor drying time, and it's airtight. And
it's got a humidity meter on it, so it'll actually tell you what the moisture in the container is, so you can kind of monitor this.
So
things.
I mean,
never heard of it.
There's another one that the guys at First Smoke were taught. They had their I think it was they're like a metal one,
right?
And they actually have a little slot where you can put the Bovita packs in. I'm not the biggest fan of the Bovita.
Well, neither am I. But anyway.
They can be controversial.
Yes, so but again, I would take it off the branch of me personally because I'm trying to hold that moisture a little bit. I put it right into buckets with a gamma lid, but I'm also growing smaller scale, not big scale, so that's different.
It's funny when I think about the Bovita because I
don't like it.
I don't like it. So there's a couple tricks that I've always used in the past. If you're doing the mason jars, I used to take a Q-tip and wet the two ends. And then it fits right in the top of the jar. So that actually helps. And back in the day, we used to use lettuce and orange.
Yeah, but then it was then it would go, hey, or you throw people throw bread in there, some shit.
Bread. Yeah, that's right.
You know what I mean? But anyway, I've used these for years. That's what I do.
Buckets.
That's what I do.
I always tell my friends, get the 5-gallon buckets with the lids, and they'll get the snap-on lids.
Nope,
and
wrong one.
You fools, that's the wrong one.
It's a gamma lid.
You want them to be airtight because there is a process, basically that's going on where there's some off gassing of the plant.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you want to be able to, that's really where we talk about. So once you've kind of gotten those branches down and they've kind of sat, I usually let them sit a week or two. Another thing too is if I don't have time to trim, I'll let it sit on the branch so that way it kind of holds itself. Same with that leaf around it.
Again, and there's a lot of options here, people. It's like,
at the next point, a lot of times we'll take it off the bud or take it off the branch and get it into a jar, in which then there's an even further burping process in which you're going to seal up the jars. A lot of times I'll seal them up. The first time I'll seal it up overnight. I'll open it up the next day. It'll be moist. I'll kind of let it off. The next time I'll seal it up. maybe 2 or 3
and
days.
Again, using your nose right there, not even necessarily touch, like smell first.
Yep.
And then again, leaving a little space in there so you can get a little movement.
Yeah, 75% full. Leave a little headspace in there.
But I will say, so for me, I always went for full dry before I went and had to worry a whole lot about burping. Once I'd go into the gammas, I'd have to burp a little bit. But again, it would go to that point where I go, okay, good, nose smells it, everything's right.
Yeah, once it's set, then you're
now it's set. Now, shout out to Scott, and I wasn't able to be here for that interview, but one of the things that I loved that he talked about, which is something I've talked a lot about as well, OGs are like an IPA. You want to smoke it fresh.
I thought that was great.
Fresh. I thought that was great talk.
I'm glad I'm glad you watched that episode. That means a lot to me.
That's a good one.
Second off, it was a good one. And second
it was a good one.
And second off, I really appreciate you bringing that up because I do feel like different genetics need different cures. I thought it was a great fact that he brought up. I
haven't heard a lot of people talk about that.
You're absolutely right.
And it's like OGs, IPAs, baby, fresh, right?
You're absolutely right.
But then I used to have this, like, it was like this, it was a Mazar Sharif or something, some old school types of. Dude, it was like pretty hazy when it was starting the jar. 3-4 months later, you'd pop that open. It was papaya. And I mean papaya. I don't mean tropical fruit. I mean papaya. And it took that time, but I always thought that was an interesting thing too. And that's obviously based on some of the off-gassing, some of the temperature off-gassing, but also there is a transition. There is a time and certain things are just have those kind of terpenes and those profiles that are best consumed fresh. And OGs are definitely that. So shout out to Scott. That was one of my favorite bits of talk there. And I was like, oh, I would have loved to be there for that. So,
I didn't address it in the episode, but what do you think about the DJ Short 365-day cure? You ever have an opinion?
I mean, to me, it's all about genetics. You know what I mean? And outside of doing,
so you think it works for certain?
I think it works for certain genetics, and outside of like true like preservation, like actually going in and doing maybe even like Frenchy style, where you've got extract, where you have a sealed edge, if you will, that's reducing any kind of air and moisture crossover, right? Because you crank open those temple balls. I mean, you've got that shell basically, right? And then there's
the dog poo inside. Right? I always loved it's like the dog poo.
Right. It's like cracking open a rock and you're like, oh my God, it's a GU. But hashish. Anyway, so I just think that's super, and I know that strain specific. And I think it's also, and I also think that flower in general doesn't lend itself to long-term preservation. I just don't think it does. I just don't think it does. Now, you want to pull out some extract that's 10 years old that's been sitting down there? Let's give it a go.
Yeah, I've seen some rosin. I've seen some live resin that's, a year old plus. I've had some that was a year old plus that came out that was pretty good. But again, there's not that same degradation.
Right. And just to kind of, wrap up the curing thing, typically, again, 2 to 8 weeks is kind of where, I mean, really fresh flower in my mind, whether it's
a couple weeks.
Exactly.
Some of these other
stuff,
genetics, a little bit more time.
Yeah. But again, that's still fresh in relative terms, right? So if you think about how long it even takes to get onto a shelf at a dispo or something like that, you might have missed the boat. In fact, inevitably, you're going to miss the boat on any OGs or anything like that. Any of the super gassy, right? Anyway, just something to think about. But tips for success, avoid over drying. That's the biggest thing. And I don't care what environment you're at. Even in a wet environment, if you overdo it, bringing it back, you're just not going to have the terpenes.
Yeah,
even if it re-wets, even if you leave a container open, which I've taken purely dried herb from here in Colorado, went to Oregon, forgot and left it open. And in the morning, I went from breaking up herb to ripping up herb, but the terps were just gone. It was hay at that point. So I never want to re-wet. And that's whether it's accidentally done naturally or trying to bring it back and revive. And that's kind of where I have the problem with any of the packs. And I'm not talking specifically about Bovita, but there's a few of them out there. I think their point is trying to keep it to a level and stick to it. But I'm just kind of don't over dry it, man. I don't know. That's me.
I find really once it's cured properly, it can retain. Again, store it in a cool, dark place. But
these are the things we talked about. It's going to be the best when you harvest it. So don't take a jar and set it and leave it in a hot car. Don't leave it in the sun. Don't put it in your pocket in a plastic bag. I know, but be surprised.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Be surprised. You know what I mean? But again, be patient, folks, right? Be patient. I think that's the biggest thing is proper curing, regardless, whether it's shorter or a longer cure. A cure is still a cure. Although I think OGs is more just a dry. and then other things are more of a cure. And I do think there's a little bit of a difference there.
That's so fascinating because that always would baffle me. It's kind of common sense now that you guys bring it up, but I'd always be baffled that there's some bud I could smoke it off of the bud, like off the stem.
Right.
I like, let's do a tester bud. And I'm like, holy shit, it's fire. Let's give it 5 more days. Oh, I shouldn't have.
So
I was so regimented about it.
And now here's the other thing is like why you want to give it that time. You do want the chlorophyll to break down. You do really want the time for the chlorophyll to break down. So that's why you wouldn't do, unless you're doing a fresh frozen extract. Well, now I don't care about chlorophyll.
I think that's 5 days minimum 5 days to get the chlorophyll to all break down.
Yeah, exactly. And in Colorado, if you were just hanging out in an open room, I'm telling you right now, it will dry out significantly in under 5 days, and you will have a harsh smoke on your hands. You will have a very harsh smoke on your hands. So
slide that down a little more, Grambo.
So Gabe, and then this is something that you have a lot more expertise in than myself. Let's talk more about water activity versus moisture level, and really kind of where the key differences are, and what, really even what that fully means to people.
So, in the context of curing cannabis, water activity and moisture level are related, but they're distinct measurements, and both play crucial roles in ensuring quality, safety, and proper storage. So, water activity basically measures the amount of water available for microbial growth, and it's basically expressed in a ratio of 0 to 1.
Interesting.
So the relevance in cannabis curing really is with a lower water activity, it minimizes the risk of mold and microbial contamination, which is critical for safety and shelf stability. So one of the things you'll end up seeing is stuff that was clean at harvest, but then all of a sudden as it's, and that's one of the reasons I was saying, like, really don't, if you have a genetic that has a propensity to mold, then has an issue. Right. Back down those waterings at the end of harvest, and realistically cut them off. Like, you want to have as little moisture in that plant before you harvest, because it's going to be sweating. So
this is the moisture that's making itself to the edge.
Yes. Okay.
Very interesting.
So proper curing typically targets a water activity of 0.55 to 0.65, which balances preservation and flavor. So you don't want to crash it out too hard, but you really want to focus on those numbers so that you're within a range that isn't going to be favorable for producing these molds and mildews. Sure. It's measured by using specialized water activity meters. You know what, Grambo, I'll give you a site and you can people can go. They're not cheap. As I remember, I think they're like $2,500. But if you're in a commercial spot,
it makes sense.
It makes sense. I mean, because reality is, in some of these states, once you fail for mold and mildew, you failed.
Well, and not to mention, some of these states, look, everything should have a threshold, and some states flat out don't have a threshold. It's 0, which isn't even really fair.
Which for anybody, that's a whole other conversation. For anybody to understand, lettuce has like a threshold of 50,000. Cannabis in most states is 10,000.
In some states is even lower, up to 0, right?
I think it's like 0.
I think Michigan's like 0, which is like,
I always be curious what tobacco is like.
It's going to be up more like with lettuce. I almost damn near
because it's always the argument would be, it's like, well, you're not smoking lettuce. It's like, all right, well, what do we smoke and what are the levels there?
Right.
Look, just so everybody knows, and this is a disturbing fact, many possibly for many, but there's a threshold in everything. Even in your can of SpaghettiOs, it can have up to like 3 rat turds. 4 rat turds?
4 rat turds?
Good.
I want to say a head of lettuce can have like 50 aphids.
Yeah, I mean, dude, and
you know what I mean?
Guys, these are documented numbers, and this is how the FDA goes and approves or disapproves. Like, this isn't.
We're not making it up.
No. But I mean, it's a little disturbing, but hey, whatever. It's a little bit of extra protein, folks. Don't worry about it.
So now let's talk about the moisture level or content. This is one of those things that they actually measure when they're this is relevant because this is really what's going to be part of dictating your THC numbers. The more moisture there is in the plant, lower THC numbers there are, in which a lot of these states, that's the way they're fudging these numbers and getting 40 some odd % because they're drying this weed down to basically no more.
Because they kind of test like a slurry of the plant material.
Well, yeah. So, on those, I don't know that they'll test the slurry, but they'll basically test a dry piece of the plant, but the less moisture there is,
it just
more
by volume.
I mean, that's why it's always blown my mind.
Dry the absolute hell out of it, but that's not what you try and put on for testing. But that's not what you
sounds
try and
great for quality.
Yeah, so and that's one of the things that's always blown my mind is like, when you're saying something is 40% THC, like you're telling me 40% of the volume of what I'm looking at is like, that's not a real thing. But when you take again, water weighs 8 pounds a gallon. So when you take the water out of it, that's
where all your waste's leaving.
Yeah.
When you start with
a plant is 45% hydrogen and 2% oxygen. Where does that hydrogen come? Where does that hydrogen come from?
Right,
comes from friggin' water.
Right,
you know what I mean. So,
so this is interesting. So this is less about obviously, has less about the microbial and that specific water activity for the microbes and bacteria, and more specific to just a
how
percentage.
Dry is your weed?
Exactly, a percentage of what the total weight is.
So the ideal moisture content for cannabis is around 10 to 12%. I know a lot of people like to see it around 8% as far as if they're running it through a trim machine. I don't love the trim machines, but I do understand that it is something that a lot of people are using. So
I understand the relevance.
You are going to want it a little bit lower to run through those trim machines, like I said, around 8-9%, just because it will stick to the blades less. So,
and this is pretty easy process, right? You weigh it before, you weigh it after, right? More or less.
Yep. Or you have some type of moisture meter,
sure.
But it's determined by weight loss, so basically, you mind sliding that down a little bit? Basically the key differences are aspect of water activity versus moisture level, what it measures, free available water for microbes. So that's the biggest thing you want to take in there. It's just that this is free of available water for microbes to kind of.
And like we were talking about, the longer you have that moisture level and that moisture content, the longer the extended period is really what gets you into trouble.
Yep. So, remember the target range as far as water conductivity is 0.5, 0.65. Though as far as actual moisture, you're going for 10 to 12%, 8% if you're putting it through a machine. The big things to remember are water activity controls microbial growth, which directly impacts safety.
Yeah, that's a safety
and quality. And moisture level ensures the cannabis is pleasant to smoke and meets proper weight specifications. Proper curing involves managing both to achieve a balance where cannabis is safe, flavorful, and potent. So it's
which we want.
And a lot of people want to rush that. I will state as well. I've had a lot of people ask. I've seen people using the cryocure machines. I don't. Here's what I'm gonna say. I think it's creepy that the weed is still like bright green and stuff like that. It makes it hard for me to believe that any chlorophyll has broken down. The reality is, I've talked to some people who've smoked the flower from it and had a pretty pleasant experience and told me it was decent flower. So I can't, that's as much as I can speak to it.
What about these rad machines? What about going back and doing any of the remediation? I mean, I figure why not touch on that at least briefly as we kind of wrap this episode up. I mean, I also look at it like, man, obviously ideal is not having to do that, but let's say you have to, and let's say you're in a state that even allows it. Like, what's your opinion on it, Gabe? And maybe explain it for people. It's not something I've ever dealt with personally, but obviously this is,
it's definitely becoming more popular on some of these larger cultivations that I've been going to. They have them on site.
Right.
I have a good friend of mine who's also named Gabe, who actually works for the company. One of the brighter people I know in the industry. He was a cultivator for a long time, out of the fill camp.
Sure.
He, from everything I can see, it is not supposed to impact the terpenes
they allege
in any way. The technology makes sense.
Can you speak on the technology at all?
Basically, they're basically hitting it with X-rays.
Right, right. So, and so it's a rad machine. Honestly, I can't think of the moniker right now, but you could look it up, and I'm sure just even put in rad machine would come right up. But yeah, it's irradiating the herb. It's putting in infrared radiation and et cetera, right, to take any microbials that are there and zap them and get rid of them. Again, a bit of a controversial thought process. I know a guy that has one on site and has also done a ton of subcontract work.
Oh yeah, I know people who just use their machines and
24/7
ship their flower through. I
figured it was worth asking about.
I think it's definitely there needs to be more research done on it.
Sure.
Truth of the matter is, when as we were discussing pre this conversation, the thresholds that they put on cannabis are overly
cautious,
overly protective. We'll say, the one thing I always say is, you're going to see heavier regulation in a state that is governed by the Department of Health than you will, but it's governed by the Department of Revenue, let's say,
or even liquor,
in which Colorado is governed by the Department of Revenue. So they really care about getting their taxes. Whereas a state that's governed by the Department of Health, they don't want people getting sick because sick people will sue them.
And they cost money.
Yeah. I mean, again, it was one of those things where like in Pennsylvania, they banned H2O2 for like 2 years. And you're like, you guys obviously have no understanding. Well, and again, that extra oxygen molecule oxidizes, it becomes H2O quickly, which is water. So like they obviously didn't have an understanding of it. So, I mean, that's one of the things where I think if you started to see some of the easing on the thresholds where they would maybe say 30,000 CFU, because again, like my question would be, if 30,000 CFU is acceptable on lettuce, why wouldn't it be acceptable on cannabis? You know what I mean?
And and even going to Granville though, I don't know specifically what, and actually that's something that I think we should go and look into. Like, what is it for tobacco? Because there is a threshold, believe you me, folks. So maybe that's something we'll look into a little bit. But hey, this has been a fun episode. This has been great. Again, thank you for the suggestion. Anybody that does have any show suggestions, we're wide open for 2025. You can set us up for bookings. You can show out, or you can throw out some show suggestions. You never know. We might just use it. This is definitely one we kind of felt like, oh man, we hadn't really covered
most everything else. And reality is it's such, you can take 4 months of really hard work and you can flush it down the freaking toilet. I always said it's
like shit in the bed at the last mile of a marathon.
Yeah. In which some people do shit during the last mile of a marathon.
But don't be that guy.
I saw that recently.
Don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. No. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Again, thank you for 10,000. That was amazing to hit that. It was a wonderful little Christmas present that we all got here in the Jug Den.
Day before Christmas, right?
It was the day before Christmas. It was the day before Christmas. So onward and upward. If you haven't, please hit that subscribe button. We appreciate all our listeners. We hope to see you out there and about. Jug Dealers out and about. Come see us. We'll be there.
Peace and love.
See you guys.